Welcome to the Liquidity Event, a show about all things personal finance with a laser focus on taxes, financial independence, and equity compensation. Hosted by AJ and Shane of Brooklyn FI, each episode will focus on a personal finance topic, some driven by news headlines and sometimes driven by listener questions. And sometimes you'll just get two money nerds rambling about what they think is interesting. Just a quick note before we get started, this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered tax or investment advice.
Hello and welcome to the Liquidity Event. This is episode 154 being recorded on August 13th and airing on August 14th. I am your host, Shane Mason.
And I'm Kurtis.
Thank you for guest co-hosting with us today, Kurtis. We have one of our normal co-hosts, AJ Ayers, is gallivanting around somewhere in southern or northern Maine. Apparently she has zero internet, so we're rooting for her up there as she continues work on her book. And on this episode, quick reminder for you listeners, we will answer your questions on the pod. If you leave us a message, you can disguise your voice and use it as a fake name if you're shy. The link is memo.fm/the liquidity events. On this episode, we have details on Figma's IPO, Silicon Valley's hard tech era. We have the release of GPT-5 from OpenAI. We have alts in your 401ks. Oh my God, so many things in this episode. We have fuck around and find out in the parenting space and RSU golden handcuffs. Kurtis, where does this podcast find you today?
I am in St. Augustine, Florida, where I've been for the last 2 years now.
Right on. How is that house?
It's great. We actually bought a house in April, so we've been mucking around with it. My office is done, so that's the important part to me.
Right.
But it's
it looks
great.
good. Thank you for wearing your Liquidity Event sweatshirt as a frequent guest host on the pod. Anyone listening, if you do guest host on the podcast, you do get a sweatshirt involved. It's probably the best part of being a co-host because it's definitely not hanging out with me for 45 minutes as we figure out how to fix the echo and the headphones ahead of the recording. Kurtis, I didn't prep you on this, but I wanted you to give a heads up to our current clients on what is upcoming from a Brooklyn FI service perspective. Tell us about YEP season. Give us a heads up, or I'm sorry, TPS season.
We've rebranded it. It's TPS or TPS season. That's a little redundant, but for our current clients, we've sent out all of our checklists, so you're getting emails from us. They're important, right? This is the time of year where we can actually use a crystal ball and help you figure out what your taxes are going to be for 2025 ahead of when they're due and filing in April 2026. So even if you feel like you don't have all the information, just send us something. We can make it work. We'll figure out what other things we're still missing from you guys and put together a really awesome projection to help strategize around that, which is one of the big points of value that we bring is proactive tax planning. It's hard to find this as accurate as we do it elsewhere, and we just really love you guys to get our documents for those and get us a kickstart on that.
Okay, right on. Cool. So if you're a client, you're listening, please send us your documents so that we can get you accurate tax projections and do some financial planning for you. Okay, why don't we start off with one of the biggest tech IPOs of the year, Kurtis. We're going to get into the Figma share IPO. Figma's IPO ends at a circuitous trip to the public markets after the company agreed to sell itself to its rival Adobe for $20 billion 3 years ago. The deal was struck down by regulators and Figma walked away with a $1 billion breakup fee. Damn, if I had $1 billion from every breakup, I would be... have a couple $1 billion. I would have spent it all. The company experienced a huge pop on IPO day. I believe it was up about 100 or 250%, but it has not performed as well since then. Kurtis, give us a walkthrough. What's going on with Figma?
So, Figma's huge. I'm glad they weren't able to sell out. We were a little bummed that they were going to become part of Adobe a couple years when we heard about that. But they're they're actually a unique IPO because they went through a tender offer last year in April, which actually triggered a lot of RSUs for their employees. So employees are having long-term RSUs at this IPO, which is highly uncommon. Usually the IPO is the liquidity event. You get taxed there. The banks and the people that invested in Figma outside of the employees made out like bandits, right? They're doing great. But employees are kind of stuck at the moment, right? They have a 180-day lockup, which, by my calculation is sometime in January, they're going to be able to sell these. So they're really hoping that this price holds. Figma's trading at $84 a share right now, which is great for your $33 RSUs. But we actually had a couple clients vest into new shares like 2 days after IPO. So they have RSUs that were vested and taxed at like $115 a share that are now at a loss. Which, silver lining, when you sell those after lockup, you can take the loss against income or other gains that you have. So it's not all bad, but we're really hoping that the price sticks so that, everyone who's been working hard to make Figma what it is gets their windfall in 6 months or so.
Well, our clients and the employees won't be the only windfall recipients. It seems that some of the founders and executives had an opportunity to sell out. Looks like Dylan Field sold $74 million worth of 2.3 million shares. The CRO sold 90,000 shares for about $3 million. And the CFO, Pravir Melwani, sold about 50,000 shares for $1.5 million, which, really isn't that much for a CFO or a CRO. I guess the 2.3 million shares from Dylan picking up $74 million is a big payday for the boy. I believe he's about 32. How does that make you feel, Kurtis?
I'm 37 and I haven't done that. So, I like to not compare myself to other people. I'm on my own
There
journey,
it
Shane.
is.
So,
Comparison is the thief of joy, as we say.
exactly.
Looks like the IPO has been doing well overall. I believe a lot of the shares were targeted at $33 and it's trading around $90 now. So even though it's down from IPO day, I see a note here that there was 4 years of pent up demand for high quality software IPO, and it's playing itself out in one trade. Said one investment banker who works on tech deals similar to this one. Looks like the other biggest cash out is actually from Index Ventures, scored huge, but one of the biggest ones was a nonprofit. This biggest cash out comes from Marin Community Foundation, sold 13.5 million shares for $442 million. It's a nonprofit that Dylan Field has previously donated shares to. So I wonder what the relationship is and what the Marin Community Foundation does. You think they're building some seasteads off the coast of San Francisco for a libertarian state just outside of international waters?
They might be. I know Marin County is in Northern California, just outside of San Francisco. So it makes sense that that could be a locality type of thing for Dylan doing that. But no, I have no idea what they do. But let's hope they use it for some good.
Okay. Yeah, right on. Cool. So we're rooting for all of our Figma clients that hold shares there. It looks like the lockup period is going to be for some time after this IPO, which happened, I believe it was last week or maybe even 2 weeks ago at this point. We skipped an episode. But for them, it won't matter too much because there is a lockout period. I believe that lockout period, we've seen these with other IPOs. The CoreWeave lockout period ends probably when this podcast airs later this week. So we have some clients there. Hopefully, we're rooting for that share price to remain solid as the floodgates open from employees to sell shares. But when can Figma employees sell their shares, Kurtis?
By my calculation, it should be like mid to late January would be my expectation. So their next opportunity to have more shares come liquid is next year at this point. But it is important, if you're not a client and you are listening to this, we can help you plan for being strategic with when that lockup ends. So give us a call. We'd love to work with you. So I'll give another plug to working with Brooklyn FI today if you are a Figma employee and not a current client.
Well,
Yeah, lots of things to maneuver.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Hopefully, multiple commas attached to your investment and divestiture. Then we can get you into a real portfolio on the other side of your lockup period opening up. So, speaking of Silicon Valley's culture and what's going on with Figma, et cetera, we do have an article here about the hard tech era of Silicon Valley and how we're in a Web 2.0 for some time with social media. And this article dives into the bizarre pendulum swing of the urban culture of San Francisco, specifically how it was long written off as a tech burnout wasteland. And it's suddenly having a cultural moment with the return of AI. It explores why people who swore they'd never return are now quietly re-signing leases, and it's fueled by a mix of nostalgia, FOMO, and the post-pandemic social scene. The tone of the article is about trend watching, part eye roll, capturing the absurdity of how fast the narrative can flip from never again to we are so back. It's an article from, I believe it's the Wall Street Journal here, on the return of Silicon Valley. I was with a client last night who told me her only option, really, if she wanted to do a mid-career switch. She's so deep within one big firm, it would have to be into one of these AI firms, and she'd have to move back to San Francisco, and she's really not feeling it. Tell me your take on the hard tech era of Silicon Valley, Kurtis.
Yeah, no, I was curious when I saw this article because it is kind of a bait and switch when you read about it. The hard tech they're talking about isn't, physical things. They're still talking software. It's just a culture shift, right? They're going back to return to office. Uh, Companies aren't as much doing the everything they can to bring software engineers to them because the type of engineer they're looking for is more specialized. So they don't have to be as lenient on free lunches or, nap pods and different stuff like that, which was the big push in Silicon Valley in kind of the 2010s era. So it's interesting to see that tech is quote unquote buckling down and getting serious
Mm.
about folks doing work, and it's not just about creativity, it's about what your output is on a daily basis.
No more resting investing at these big firms. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yep.
There is this article is from the Times, by the way. Excuse me if I misspoke earlier, but it's a bit of a refresher on like the history of the pre-pandemic Silicon Valley era of actually from the show Silicon Valley, which it satires heavily. It's around resting
Great.
investing. Great, it is a great show. Shout out to Big Head, um, and the cicadas of episode season one. But yeah, it's like a history of like when there was everyone was focused on social media, and then the pandemic happened, and now we're shifting back into an AI space, and like Google is getting rid of all of its, some of it, not all of its perks, but a lot of its perks, in an effort to go lean and capture as much of this market as possible in the AI space. And they're calling it the arena parts of San Francisco.
I, I love that. That was hilarious. I was like, all right, because we're gonna throw down an Embarcadero or something, but
Yeah, the arena of zeros and ones. Speaking of AI, we're going to do a transition over here to the release of ChatGPT 5.
yeah.
AI has begun rolling, or OpenAI has begun rolling out ChatGPT 5. I've played with it some. It's the latest iteration of its flagship language model to all ChatGPT users. The company's CEO, Sam Altman, called GPT-5 a significant step along the path to AGI, which I disagree with because I know so much about AGI. During a press briefing on Wednesday, while he stopped short of claiming the model reaches artificial general intelligence, Altman noted that the latest release is clearly a model that is generally intelligent. Generally intelligent, not artificial general intelligence. He added that GPT-5 still lacks key traits that would make it reach AGI, a notably loose term that is defined in OpenAI's charter as a highly autonomous system that outperforms humans at most economically valuable work, such as writing poems and all the cool creative arts jobs that it's stealing. For example, the model still lacks the ability to learn continuously after deployment. I think that's the biggest one is we still have to train the models. And if they
Yeah.
can learn themselves after we set them loose, then they would be artificially generally intelligent. Have you played with GPT-5 yet, Curtis?
I haven't played with GPT-5. I know that, we have some training that we do with it for internal stuff. I I feel like I'm an older millennial, but I'm also kind of crotchety about tech. So like GPT and all that is like interesting, but not enough for me to dive into it. So I'm a light user of it. So all of my evidence of how if GPT-5 is better or worse, right, is anecdotal. I think an interesting thing is to paid users, they did kind of backtrack and let them keep using 4.0,
Mm-hmm.
if I remember correctly. So then GPT-5 may not be all it's cracked up to be if people are clamoring for what they're used to. But change is also scary. So, people may not have grokked how to use it quite yet. What's your experience with it so far, Shane?
I haven't vibe coded with it yet. I haven't vibe coded since like last summer, actually, unfortunately. But AJ already whipped up some sort of, the beginning of Clueless when she's using the app to pick out her clothing. AJ has been complaining about how that app doesn't exist for the past, like, I don't know, since I've met her like 9 years ago. And I think she vibe coded that up. Not sure if it still works. It's really good at creating standalone stuff, but actually deploying it and getting it integrated into like a code base is where I've had trouble rolling out some of the vibe code that I've been able to develop. And I've heard that from other people as well that run engineering teams. I think one cool thing is that you no longer need to select your model; it'll select it for you. So if you were trying to decide between 401 or O3 Mini or whatever, like some people are bereft that they've lost their choice because they like to interact with certain ones and prompt them in certain ways, and they got certain responses, and then maybe they even switched over to Claude for other items. They've lost some of the models that they were previously available to them. I think you need to be a superpower user or an innovator, or you might need to touch grass if you're that upset about losing your access to the models.
Exactly.
I think that, my prediction was that each of these releases, vibe coding will make its way up that, innovation curve, from the innovators to the early adopters, where I think we are now. I think GPT-6 will introduce this, the early majority, hopefully, of people to vibe coding. And by that, I mean like people that aren't tech literate will start figuring out that they can vibe code stuff up relevant to their personal lives, right? Like my sister might vibe code up a platform to help organize her family's affairs or things of that nature. If you could vibe code up an app, if you had an idea that you wanted to execute on, do you have an idea handy there, Curtis, that you would like to see implemented, or you've ideated something that you'd like to see in the real world?
I mean, I'm a big fan of board games,
Oh, there
right?
we go.
So something that would either, and this is the issue with GPT of having, clarity issues or sometimes misinformation, is like if I could feed a 32-page rule book to GPT and it spits out a step by step how to play this game, I would love that, right? That'd be incredible. So maybe I should give my hand at that and see what I can find out.
Dear listener, if you did not know who Curtis Rolfe is, by the way, we don't even introduce you anymore. You've been on the podcast so many times, but you are one of our financial planners here at BKFi. You've worked with us over 4 years now, I believe.
October is
Okay, all
4,
right.
so nearly
Okay,
4.
fantastic. I was flipping through old photos from old retreats, and it's so fun to see you 4 years ago. We were all younger back then, of course. But for those
We
of you
sure
that don't
were.
know, Curtis is also our resident board game expert. Every retreat, he brings board games, and I do believe we're firing up a professional board game geek account at BKFI so you can crush me at Carcassonne and Sagrada in the near future. You will be happy to hear that I played Watergate last night, which is where you play the editors versus Richard Nixon in a heads-up duel.
Yeah.
And I was using ChatGPT to help us figure out the rules because there was a pivotal
Nice.
turn that the
Mm,
YouTube host Watch It Played did not cover in his video, which is very frustrating because he usually does a immaculate job of explaining how to play a game. So anyway, circling back to ChatGPT, one other fun fact
yeah.
that I looked up on this is that on Polymarket, which is a website that you can go to and just bet on anything, and you can use it as a bellwether to determine when something is going to happen. It's kind of like the polls for a political race. You can go on Polymarket and bet on anything, and you can see where people are betting. And there was like a 35% of people were betting that Chat or OpenAI would release AGI in 2025, and after the release of Chat GPT or the version 5 GPT 5, that amount has dropped down to 6%. So it looks like AGI
Wow.
has been pushed back to some degree by the release.
Punted to next year at least.
Yeah, so it's I've seen a lot of people freaking out on the subreddits, on the ChatGPT subreddit, about how it's way worse. These are just the vibes of what's going on with
Yeah.
ChatGPT. All right, let's do a pivot into the finance space. Trump has somebody has signed the availability for certain types of assets that were previously not allowed in 401ks due to their speculative nature. They are now allowed into the 401ks. For example, we have we have real estate funds, we have cryptocurrencies, and we now also have what is our last asset here that was now
Uh, they called it private
oh yes,
equity.
private
Is
equity, of
they kind of
course.
gave it was as a big.
Right. Okay. So we're going to pivot into a bit of a CFP level discussion of why these types of assets previously haven't been allowed in 401ks. For those of you that don't know, the history of 401ks is quite interesting. They were rolled out under the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974. So this law was passed. These laws were passed prior to our corporate oligarchy that we currently live in. Don't at me. So they are very protective of the employee. These were intended to replace the pension funds and to shift the responsibility of you funding your own retirement away from the employer, which disappeared more rapidly than they used to in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Think about railroads and retirement pension funds, and they've shifted that responsibility to you to fund your own 401k. In an effort to make them rock solid and to make sure that employers make contributions, the ERISA rules are very strict on what can and can't be included, who can and can't run one, how to make contributions, all tons of stuff, all kinds of stuff. And previously, you could not put items such as private equity, cryptocurrency, and real estate into these types of assets. Kurtis, what are your thoughts on why this has happened? What's going on with this administration's push to allow these into the investable assets within these types of funds, and the pros and cons?
Yeah, I mean, it's always something new every day, it feels like, with this administration. It's something, right? This is another executive order, so it's not like Congress has put this in. They haven't changed the ERISA rules or anything like that. This is kind of cracking the door to let 401k firms add stuff in, basically. We could see this get struck down or rolled back, but there's a possibility of allowing this so far. I think it's risky. The most interesting thing in this article, which was kind of my biggest fear, is they mentioned BlackRock adding PE funds to their target date fund. So if you're not familiar with target date retirement funds, you set up your 401k. It's the easiest thing to pick. You go, I want to or expect to retire in 2055, right? It's preset, it's time based. So once you hit 2055, it's a much more conservative portfolio, ready for you to retire. But now they're sneaking this in. So instead of being a normal, diversified, understandable, right, kind of portfolio of assets in there, they're going to put in private equity. They may now sneak in crypto, which just adds like another level of risk that doesn't necessarily have the return that you are not guaranteed or promised, but hope for or expect from that type of portfolio. So it just adds some opacity to what's in
Mm-hmm.
there, which I think can be, it's another great way for, you know, we're coming out of, hopefully, right, this IPO winter that we've been in for about 24 months. This is a great way for private equity to pass the bag onto unsuspecting retail folks inside of their 401k and get fresh powder for the next hot thing they want to invest in. So I think it's bad, is my takeaway, but we'll see what actually happens with it.
I've got pros and cons on it as well. And just, I'm going to take a second to help define risk for listeners that might not. There's all different types of definitions of risk, but one of the aspects of risk is understanding what you're investing in, right? And understanding having an idea of what the returns on that investment will be. And cryptocurrency specifically, the reason I rag on cryptocurrency is because cryptos, while they do go up and down in value, similar to a stock, they do not provide any cash outflows. There is no underlying investment. There is no underlying corporate team that is trying to take your investment and turn that into more money and returning that back to you by making investments in infrastructure or technology or employees or anything like that. So we really do not have a good track record. Well, first of all, there's no cash flows. Second of all, it's a very young asset. It's only been around since about, it's been around long, like 2008 or 9, but it's only came onto the corporate radar in 2017 when there was the first big Bitcoin push. So we just have less information about it compared to other investments. So that is one element of risk. Also, it doesn't generate any cash flows. So if suddenly we all decide, hey, this thing is worthless, we don't actually want to park our cash here anymore, there's not like an underlying investment underneath of it. It's just based on the whims of the market. So that's, speculation and tulip bulbs, et cetera. I would say from a pros perspective, there's more options now available for 401k investors. Right. So in a weird way, I think that is good to have options, unless, to your point, those options that are now available are hugely speculative and don't provide actual benefits to the investors. And then some might accidentally get hoodwinked into investing in something that is very opaque, speculative, doesn't provide cash flows, et cetera. But there is a weird use case out there for people that might only have 401k investments that want to get exposure to these types of things, right? Like, let's say I've been working at a company for 40 years. I have no taxable brokerage account. I've got $4 million in a 401k because all of my investments have been going in there. And I want to get some exposure to a BlackRock private equity fund for whatever reason, or some cryptocurrency. And then instead of taking a distribution from the 401k, I can do that investment within the account. I would say the cons are that our investors that experience overconfidence bias or familiarity bias relevant to cryptocurrencies can now put all of their 401k into the speculative asset, which could, empty out their retirement, as opposed to investing in a diversified index of funds that we know will have some sort of, realizable returns based on their historical returns. Anyway, that was a ton of jargon. Let's go somewhere fun. Let's talk about beating our kids. Kurtis, we have an article here, says from the Wall Street Journal, says, "Goodbye, gentle parenting. Hello, F around and find out," or FAAFO. What was your take on this article? It's really just not a fluff article, but it's not exactly a finance article. This is a fun one around how parenting is changing, and how, while Gen Z might have been raised softly, I think millennials might be raising the next generation a little bit rougher.
This is, some of these stories I read were like, okay, this is reasonable. Some of them were unreasonable. The one that it started out with, where or they even talk about, like, it's not just FAAFO, it's like out feral, they're feral, right? Is kind of the vibe here, where, this person talked about, she told her kid, hey, please don't squirt me with a squirt gun at the campground. The kid did it, so she chucked him in the pond, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is the problem with pranks. There's a problem with a lot of different things, is escalation, right? If your kid thought that was funny and they want to escalate it further, what happens next, right? They flood your tent at the campground. Like, it's not tenable at the end of the day. Like, they didn't say that they did this, but I'm extrapolating thoughts. It's like, this seems more like treating them as if you're their older sibling who's going to show them who's boss, rather than truly parenting. Some other folks in here talked about stuff like forcing their kid to finish out a year or a semester of an extracurricular that the parents paid for the kid to do, right? Like, that is more in the middle sensible in my mind, because their example there was like, if you get a mortgage or a car loan, you can't just say, I don't like this car anymore, and stop paying the loan, right? Like, if you commit to something, there are financial consequences to that. Sure, am I going to force my kid to do this extracurricular for 4 years? No, that's not healthy. But if saying, hey, I paid through the end of the school year, you're going to participate for that long, and then you can quit, seems reasonable. I think this is you're right, it's a fun fluff article. It's, they're swinging the pendulum the other way from gentle parenting, right? I think there's a happy middle ground.
I guess there's a couple themes. There's 3 themes that I've noticed. One of them is, do you hit your kid? Like, every parent kind of thinks about these things. I'm not a parent, but I have a lot of friends.
Me neither.
Family, yeah. So. Do we hit our kids? Right? That's probably not the answer. But how do we build resilience for our kids? Do we baby them and then they're not prepared for the world, the outside world? And then there's, of course, the challenge of being friends with your kids versus being their parent, right? And I've seen friendships work out fantastic. My niece and my sister are very close friends. And I think they can switch back and forth from parenting to friendship. But child psychologists, probably people have different opinions. Now, with the time that we have left, we have 2 Reddit questions. I'm going to have you answer them. I'm
Yeah.
going to offer no opinion because you are the
Ooh.
better financial planner for today's podcast. So, question on Reddit: is it financially prudent to spend 60% of your total net worth on not just a home, but a forever home, Kurtis?
Yeah, and in parentheses it says all cash purchase, which that portion is probably the biggest red flag other than the trite financial planner answer that I can
Mm.
give when I see
Mm-hmm.
this, which is it depends, right? And I don't like giving that answer, but with the information provided in this question, I don't have enough information to give
We say
a
this every time.
fiduciary answer or honestly a fair answer. Yeah, I
Okay,
mean
but if
like
you had
it's
to,
the
because we did every time we
if
answer
I
a
had
question, it's like we
yeah,
always
yeah,
do that.
exactly,
Well, I don't have a
exactly.
full
If
plan
I
put together.
had
How
to give
old?
an
Yeah.
answer, if I had to give an answer with the advice here, I would say let's ignore prudence and let's say is it efficient, right? Because I think that's more measurable than what is prudent. Um, it's usually not efficient to pay all cash for a home forever or otherwise, right? You're losing out on the opportunity to take the theoretically, depending on your current mortgage rates, yes, the mortgage interest deduction on your taxes. So that's not a reason to buy a house, but it's a reason to have a mortgage. You're missing out on that deduction. And then you're tying up a lot of your net worth into the home where they mentioned they had a currently paid off house. If their paid off house is worth more than the down payment on this forever home, they are going to have assets left over. And if you invest that into a long term portfolio, you could use some of that growth or cash flows to cash flow that mortgage, right? We'd have to do more planning
Mm-hmm.
around it if if I were their planner, but there are definitely whole mortgage debt tends in most cases not to be bad debt. And I think that's something that we've drifted away from is a lot of people are going no debt, no debt, no debt for any
Mm-hmm.
debt, right? And there are upsides to having debt. That's how rich people do it,
Mm.
right? Debt is a rich people move.
Mm.
Like they borrow against their shares, they take out loans. Like that's how they do it. So having a mortgage isn't bad. I would say that it is not prudent or even efficient to pay all cash for a forever home or otherwise. My other opinion is that primary housing is not an investment. If you lock up 60% of your net worth in this, that's 60% of your net worth that you are probably never going to be able to touch ever again. I think John Owens loves to say, you can't eat your home, right? So that's another level of why it's not prudent to do that in my mind.
So there's better use of assets and debts here than yeah. I hear you on the taking a tax deductible mortgage interest, investing what you didn't put into the house and getting a higher return, and then worst case scenario you take out an S block to pay off your mortgage if the market's down and you don't want to take distributions. That is an advanced level approach to the question. Last question, and I'm with you on that. That's how I would do it as well. I want to
Yeah.
sell my business and then use the money to invest in other people's businesses. What is that even called? Private equity? Venture capital?
I love that they jumped to private equity. Private equity has been big in the
Yeah.
news, right? Like, there's lots of people talking about it. The comments on this really hit the nail on the head. This is called angel investing or venture capital, right? That's what we're talking. We're talking about putting large sums of money, betting on individuals or small groups of people to do well. Um, and that's where my concern comes in, right? This person actually talks about it's not today that they're selling their business. They're planning to sell it in 10 years. So they've got a timeline to wait for this. But the risk here, if they were to take that saleable investment and dump it into individuals, you are betting on a single person to be successful. And you're hoping that you always pick the right people. And that is basically impossible to
Mm.
do. We'll say I'll throw that out there, but it's like really risky because people can have a good business idea but be a terrible business owner, right? What is it? I think something like 50% of all businesses fail in the first 3
Mm.
years. So that's not a great statistic for throwing money at folks. Honestly, for this person, it's like, if you want to do this, we go with even a heavier percentage. Core and explore is what we call it in financial planning. Is you need to have a diversified asset bucket of
That's the core.
investments, and then that's your core,
Mhm.
right? And then the explore is whatever you don't need to retire or support yourself, take that and do whatever you want with it. Be ready for that money to go to zero. So if you can't risk all your $15 million sale to go to zero, you shouldn't be betting all of that on people.
Right. This is a business owner, right? And they're probably pretty risk tolerant. So to tell them to go to 0% risk tolerance and just put it all into a core portfolio, diversified assets, and hey, don't worry about investing or trying to take risks, that's going to be a hard one to accomplish, right? So I think your core and explore is a nice compromise. So I'm with you on that. And that's all we have for this week's episode. Thank you so much for our guest host, Mr. Kurtis Rolfe, for coming on the episode this week. This has been episode 154. Please email us your financial problems at liquidityevent@brooklynfi.com so we don't have to answer randoms Reddit questions, and you can leave us a voicemail at mo.fm/the-liquidity-event and we'll play it on the air. And finally, the stands out there can leave us a 5-star review if you want to be weird about it. Thank you, Kurtis.
Thanks, Shane.
All right, take care, listeners.
You too. Bye.